Chapter 1. The King's Command. The banners of Dravencia hung heavy in the cold wind, crimson and gold, their embroidered lions fluttering above the stone walls like ghosts of old glory. From the highest tower the bells tolled dusk, summoning nobles, lords, and strangers from across the borderlands into the great hall of King Alaric III, the boy who had become a king far too young. The war between Dravencia and Irondale had devoured 15 winters. Blood had seeped into the soil so deep that even the wheat now grew crimson under the summer sun. Yet tonight the kingdom pretended peace was possible. King Alaric stood before the tall mirror in his private chamber, tugging at the high collar of his ceremonial coat. The garment was woven from dark velvet, embroidered with threads of gold that caught the candlelight like fire. He hated it, the weight of it, the stiffness, the image of a monarch who had never known freedom since his crown had been thrust upon him at 17. "Your Majesty," murmured Sir Rowan, his most trusted knight, as he adjusted the king's cloak, "the envoy from Irondale has arrived. They await you in the great hall." "Let them wait," Alaric said quietly, his reflection sharp and lonely in the mirror. "Peace, it seems, must be earned by patience." Rowan hesitated. "And by sacrifice." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Yes, always by sacrifice." He turned from the mirror and walked toward the window. Beyond the ramparts, the torches of the arriving carriages glimmered like fireflies in the mist. Somewhere down there, in that sea of gilded guests and scheming diplomats, the future of two kingdoms balanced on a knife's edge. And among them, though he did not yet know it, fate had already written the name Seraphine Valmont. In the servants' quarters below the hall, Seraphine tightened the cords of her plain grey dress and tucked a stray curl beneath her kerchief. Around her, the other handmaidens hurried to prepare the tables and polish the goblets until they gleamed like mirrors. No one paid her much attention. To them, she was just another nameless girl, new to the royal kitchens, hired to pour wine and stay silent. That was exactly what she wanted. The scent of roasting pheasant, crushed grapes, and burning oak filled the air. Seraphine tried to focus on her task, arranging silver cutlery for nobles who would never know hunger, but her hands trembled slightly. The last time she had stood within the castle walls, she had been a child, clutching her mother's hand as the guards dragged her to the courtyard to die. Her mother, accused of witchcraft for healing the sick without a physician's license. Seraphine had survived by vanishing into the shadows, tending to soldiers in secret, passing from village to village under false names. But now she had returned to Dravencia, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. There was one man she needed to find, a wounded soldier whose life hung in balance, and the king's banquet provided her the only chance to reach the castle infirmary undetected. Or so she thought. The great hall shimmered with torchlight, the walls draped in silks and garlands of winter roses. Harps played softly in the corner, their notes weaving through the air like whispered prayers. Lords and ladies from both kingdoms mingled cautiously, their laughter brittle, their smiles sharpened by politics. When King Alaric entered, a hush fell over the hall. The crowd bowed deeply. He was tall, broad-shouldered yet lean, his presence commanding without effort. His hair, black as obsidian, fell just to his collar, framing eyes the color of storm clouds. His crown was simple, but heavy with meaning. Each jewel in it had been bought with lives lost on the battlefield. "Welcome," his voice rang out, steady and resonant. "Tonight, Dravencia and Irondale dine not as enemies, but as men and women who wish to see the sun rise on peace." Applause followed, thin but polite. Yet Seraphine, standing near the edge of the dais with a jug of wine in hand, saw the tension in his gaze, the fatigue etched in his posture. Power had aged him faster than years. She poured goblets as she moved along the tables, keeping her head bowed, her scent of lavender and smoke faint beneath the perfume of nobles. And still, something within her urged her to look up, to see the man everyone feared and revered. When she finally did, their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat the world shifted. Later that night, when the musicians played louder and the laughter grew forced, Seraphine slipped quietly toward the back of the hall to refill her pitcher. The corridors beyond were dimly lit, echoing with distant revelry. As she approached the servants' stairwell, she heard it, the unmistakable metallic whisper of a blade being drawn. Instinct froze her breath. From the shadows, a cloaked figure stepped forward, moving silently toward the entrance that led to the king's private table. His hand glinted with steel. Seraphine didn't think. She dropped her jug, the crash of metal and wine echoing through the corridor. The assassin spun. Too late. She lunged forward, snatching the torch from the wall, and struck his arm. The blade clattered to the floor as he hissed and fled into the darkness. Shouts erupted. Guards thundered in from the hall. "Seize him," came Rowan's voice. "Someone protect the king." But the would-be killer was gone. In the confusion, Seraphine stood frozen, breathless, the torch still in her shaking hands. Her kerchief had come loose, and her curls spilled over her shoulders, catching the firelight. The king himself appeared at the corridor's end, his hand on his sword, eyes sharp with command. "What happened here?" Alaric demanded. She saved you, sire," said one of the guards breathlessly. "The man, he meant to strike through the tapestry near your table." She saw him. Alaric's gaze fell upon the young woman, the plain servant with wild curls and terrified eyes. "Your name," he said quietly. She hesitated. "Seraphine, your majesty." "Seraphine," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue, then softer. "You risked your life for mine." "I did what anyone would," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "I saw danger. I acted." "No," Alaric said, stepping closer, his voice lowering. "Not anyone would. Most freeze, most fear. You didn't." The scent of lavender and faint smoke clung to her, the smell of herbs and flame, of something wild and untamed. It lingered long after the guards escorted her away for questioning. Hours later, when the banquet was over and the castle slept, Alaric sat alone in his chamber, the candles burning low. The attempted assassination had shaken his court. Whispers would rise by dawn, but his mind was not on politics or enemies. It was on her. He could still see her eyes, bright even in fear, still hear her voice, trembling but resolute, still smell the trace of her, that strange, intoxicating scent he couldn't name. He rose, walked the open window, and stared at the moonlit gardens below. "She was a servant," Rowan had said. "Likely a spy. We'll investigate her past." But something in Alaric resisted that. There was no deceit in her face, only sorrow, deep and hidden, a sorrow that mirrored his own. Seraphine, he whispered into the cold night, why can't I forget your scent? Down in the servants' quarters, Seraphine lay awake on her straw mattress, staring at the flickering shadows. She knew she had drawn the king's eye, and that was dangerous. No good ever came of being noticed by kings. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw him, the weight of his crown, the loneliness in his eyes, and she felt something stir inside her that frightened her more than any blade. A warmth, a longing, a sense that fate had just begun to play its cruelest game. Chapter 2. The Healer's Daughter. The morning after the banquet dawned grey and brittle. A thin mist coiled through the courtyard, wrapping the castle in silence. From the highest tower, the banners hung limp and motionless, a kingdom holding its breath. In the great hall, servants scrubbed away the remnants of last night's feast. Spilled wine, broken glass, the faint trace of panic that lingered after the assassin's failed strike. Yet among them, one woman worked quietly, unseen, her movements careful, her gaze distant. Seraphine Valmont. She scrubbed at a stain that would not lift, though her thoughts were far from the floor. Every few moments she paused, her heart pounding as if expecting armored boots to thunder toward her. She knew how these courts worked. Today's hero could be tomorrow's traitor. The truth rarely mattered in a world where power was its own religion. When she straightened, her back aching, she found herself face to face with an older woman, stout, gray-haired, her expression wary but not unkind. You're the one who saved the king, the woman whispered. God's girl, do you know what you've done? Seraphine froze. I did what anyone should. The woman shook her head, lowering her voice. No, dear. You drew his eye. That's a dangerous thing. The king doesn't forget easily, nor do the men who serve him. Before Seraphine could reply, the sound of boots echoed from the corridor. Two guards appeared. Lady Seraphine Valmont, one of them said, her breath caught. They know my name. She had given her first name, but not the rest. How did they know her family name? Her mind raced. Had someone from the court recognized her mother's eyes? The king requests your presence, the guard said. Now, the royal chamber smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting shards of color across the marble floor. King Alaric stood by the table, poring over maps, his cloak thrown carelessly across the chair. When the guards ushered her in, he dismissed them with a flick of his hand. Leave us. The doors shut softly behind her. Seraphine lowered her head. Your Majesty, raise your eyes, he said quietly. I prefer to speak to the face of the woman who saved my life. She obeyed, reluctantly. He was no longer wearing his crown, only a simple black tunic, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked less like a king and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. You were questioned by my captain? He asked. Yes, your Majesty. They asked me of the man I saw, but I could not see his face. He nodded slowly, studying her. You handled yourself with courage. The court will call it luck. I call it instinct. Seraphine's fingers tightened around the hem of her dress. I have experience reading danger. From where? His tone was not cruel, only curious, but the question sliced through her calm. From tending to the wounded, my lord, on battlefields, in villages. My mother was a healer. His gaze softened, a noble calling. A bitter smile flickered on her lips. Not in Dravencia. That made him pause. Why do you say that? She looked up at him then, truly looked, and he saw the flicker of something deep in her eyes. Pain, defiance, memory. "My mother was accused of witchcraft," she said, "for curing what the court physicians could not. She died in your father's reign." Alaric's expression shifted. Shock, then shame. "I was a boy then," he murmured. "I did not know the names of the condemned." "She was one of them," Seraphine whispered. "Ilara Valmont." He turned away, guilt stirring like a storm beneath his ribs. He remembered that name now, faintly, from some forgotten scroll. The King's Inquisition, they had called it. Justice, they said, cleansing. But it had been cruelty cloaked in law. "I cannot undo the past," Alaric said softly. "But I can offer you safety now." She laughed, quiet, trembling, but edged with disbelief. "Safety? There is no safety for women like me, not when whispers of witchcraft still cling to my blood." "You have my word," he said. "As your king." Seraphine met his eyes, and for the first time she saw not a ruler, but a man weighed down by ghosts. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her, and something within her chest, something she had buried long ago, began to stir. "I don't need a king's word," she said softly, "only the truth." "And what truth would that be?" "That you will not forget what you said tonight, only to condemn me tomorrow." His jaw tightened. "You think I am my father?" "I think," she said, meeting his gaze steadily, "that crowns have long memories." The silence between them stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Alaric exhaled and turned toward the table, pouring 2 goblets of wine. He offered one to her. "Sit," he said. "You have my promise. No interrogations, no accusations, only conversation." Seraphine hesitated, then sat. The goblet trembled faintly in her hand. "I do not often meet people who speak to me like you do," Alaric said, studying her. "Without fear?" "I have known fear too long to bow to it," she replied. "It loses its edge when it's your only companion." A faint smile touched his lips. "You speak like a poet." "I speak like a woman who's seen too much war." He raised his goblet. "Then we are kin in that, Seraphine Valmont." They drank in silence. Through the windows, light fell across his face, catching the faint scar near his jaw. The mark of a soldier, not just a king. She found herself wondering how many battles he had fought, how many ghosts followed him to bed each night. "I will find who sent that assassin," he said at last, "and when I do, there will be no mercy." "Be careful," she murmured. "Mercy and justice often wear the same mask. It's easy to strike the wrong one." He turned toward her, struck by the quiet conviction in her tone. "You speak as if you've worn that mask yourself." She looked away. Once, later, as she left the king's chamber, she passed through the corridors with her heart thundering in her chest. She told herself it was fear, fear of being discovered, of being remembered. Yet another part of her whispered otherwise, that the reason her pulse raced was because his eyes had lingered, not in suspicion, but in something else entirely, something forbidden. From the shadows of the gallery above, Sir Rowan watched her go. His expression was unreadable. When she disappeared into the stairwell, he turned toward the chamber and entered quietly. "You spoke with the girl," he said. Alaric nodded without looking up. "She's not what she seems. No servant ever is," Rowan replied. "Shall I have her followed?" "No," Alaric said sharply, then softened his tone. "Not yet. She's saved my life. I owe her at least the semblance of trust." Rowan hesitated, then inclined his head. "As you command, my king, but I would advise caution. Women who hide their lineage often do so for a reason." When he was gone, Alaric looked toward the empty doorway where she had stood. Her scent lingered faintly in the air, lavender, smoke, and something warm he couldn't name. He pressed his hand to the table, feeling the echo of her voice in his mind. A healer's daughter, a condemned name, a forbidden soul. He should have forgotten her then. That would have been wise. But wisdom was a stranger to desire. That night rain fell over Dravencia, a relentless drizzle that soaked the cobblestones and drummed softly on the window panes. In her small chamber beneath the kitchens, Seraphine sat by the hearth, grinding herbs into a mortar. The scent of lavender filled the air, soothing yet bittersweet. She had made this salve 100 times before, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She thought of the king's eyes, the shadow of guilt in his voice when he spoke of her mother. No man of power had ever spoken to her that way, not with pity, not with interest, but with something that felt dangerously close to understanding. When the door creaked, she flinched. "Seraphine," whispered a familiar voice. It was Mira, the older handmaiden from that morning. "The king's messenger came down. He's asked for you to tend his hand. He cut it on the sword training grounds." Seraphine hesitated. Now, Mira said, her eyes wide. "He trusts no one else." Seraphine rose slowly, heart pounding. She wiped her hands, tucked her small pouch of salves beneath her apron, and followed the corridor upward toward the royal wing. In the king's private training chamber, torches flickered low, casting a golden glow on the walls. Alaric stood near the center, his tunic damp from rain, his hand wrapped in linen. When she entered, he turned, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You came? I was told you were injured," she said quietly, approaching him. "May I?" He extended his hand. A shallow cut marked his palm, still bleeding slightly. She set down her pouch and knelt before him, gently unwinding the linen. Her fingers brushed his skin, warm, calloused, human. "You should have had the royal physician see to this," she murmured. "I trust the healer's daughter more." Her breath caught at his words. "You shouldn't say that aloud, sire, not where others can hear." "I speak only the truth," he said, "and the truth is, your touch feels like safety." She looked up at him then, startled by the honesty in his voice. The firelight shimmered against his eyes, turning them to molten gray. He reached out, as if to touch her cheek, then stopped. Himself, "Your scent," he said softly, "lavender and smoke. It's been with me all day." She froze, her pulse quickening. "You should forget it, my lord." He smiled faintly, sad, almost wistful. "Some things cannot be forgotten." When she left his chamber that night, her heart ached with confusion. She told herself it was foolish, impossible. He was a king, she was a ghost in his court, the daughter of a condemned woman, and yet somewhere deep within her a spark had been lit, a spark that neither crown nor fear could ever extinguish. Chapter 3. Whispers and Wounds. The days that followed the attempted assassination passed like a dream wrapped in danger. The castle no longer breathed easily. Guards lined the corridors, and whispers fluttered through the court like restless birds. The king was alive, yes, but something unseen stirred beneath the surface. A rumor, a tension that even the sunlight couldn't chase away. And in the quiet corners of that fortress of stone, an impossible bond grew in secret. King Alaric spent his mornings in council, surrounded by nobles who spoke of peace with honeyed tongues and daggers in their eyes. The envoy from Irondale, Lord Thane, smiled too often. His sister, Princess Alara, smiled even more, especially at the king. She was beautiful in the way marble is beautiful, flawless, cold, and untouchable. Her golden hair caught the light like polished glass, and every gesture was deliberate, a practiced art. She had been promised to Alaric since before the war ended, their union a symbol of fragile reconciliation. But symbols did not stir a heartbeat. Symbols did not haunt dreams. During the council, while the nobles argued over borders and taxes, Alaric's thoughts wandered to the quiet woman with the healer's hands and the scent of lavender and smoke. He caught himself once, staring absently at the flame of a candle, remembering how that same light had flickered over Seraphine's face when she'd bandaged his wound. His mind betrayed him, replaying the brush of her fingers, the steadiness in her voice. "Your Majesty," came the voice of Chancellor Verdun, thin and cautious. "You seem distracted." Alaric blinked. "I was considering your proposal," he lied smoothly. "Continue." But in truth, his thoughts were nowhere near treaties or titles. They lingered in the shadows of the healer's chambers below, where the scent of her herbs still clung to his hands. Seraphine kept her distance for 3 days. She worked silently, tending to wounded guards and cleaning the infirmary, but her heart was not at rest. She felt his gaze even when he wasn't there, the invisible thread between them, taut and humming. Mira, ever watchful, noticed it too. "You've been restless since that night," she said quietly as they arranged bandages. "If you value your life, you'll forget him." Seraphine forced a small smile. "How does one forget a man whose name is written on every wall?" "You're not the first to catch a king's eye," Mira warned, "but no woman keeps it for long. When he weds the Irondale princess, he'll not look twice at a servant again." "I know my place," Seraphine whispered, but that night, when the moon rose high, she found herself walking toward the northern garden, the one forbidden to servants after dark. The air was thick with jasmine and rain, and there, near the old fountain, stood the king. He was waiting. "I shouldn't be here," she said softly. "Neither should I," he answered, his voice low, almost rough. "Yet here we are." She stopped a few paces away. "If we're seen, then let them see," he interrupted. "Let them say their words. They'll speak whether I give them reason or not." Seraphine's heart stuttered. "You risk everything." He stepped closer, the moonlight catching the faint scar at his jaw. "For once," he murmured, "I wish to risk something for myself." Silence fell between them, the kind that trembles with everything unsaid. The wind lifted her hair, carrying that faint trace of lavender toward him. He closed his eyes briefly, as if the scent itself was enough to undo him. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have any woman in your kingdom." His eyes opened, fierce, weary, honest. "Because you are the only one who looks at me and sees not a crown." Her breath caught. She wanted to turn away, to flee from the danger in his words. Yet she couldn't. Something greater held her there, something that felt like inevitability. He reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist. "Seraphine," he said quietly, "if I could, I would forget the laws, the crown, the world itself." She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, The space between them vanished. But before she could speak, footsteps echoed from the terrace. Alaric drew back swiftly, his expression hardening. Rowan appeared, torch in hand. "Your Majesty, the council waits for you." The Irondale envoys grow impatient. Alaric's voice was cold now. "Tell them they may wait a little longer." Rowan's eyes flicked to Seraphine, his suspicion thinly veiled. "And the servant?" Alaric's gaze didn't waver. "She's dismissed." Seraphine bowed quickly and slipped into the shadows, her heart hammering. By morning, whispers had begun to stir. Servants spoke in hushed tones of how the king was seen walking alone in the garden. Some claimed he met a ghost, others a lover. But in the kitchens, Mira heard the truth carried like smoke on the wind. "They say the king favors the healer's daughter," one cook murmured. "He spends his nights in her company." Another laughed. "A fine scandal that will make when he marries the princess. Irondale won't stand for a peasant mistress." "Careful," Mira warned. "Words like that can hang a woman." Seraphine said nothing, but that night she found a folded parchment beneath her chamber door, a summons bearing the royal seal. She met him again in the chapel courtyard. The sky had darkened with the promise of rain, thunder rolling in the distance. Alaric stood by the marble statue of Saint Mera, the patron of mercy, his cloak whipping in the wind. "You shouldn't send for me," she said, glancing around nervously. "Someone will see." "Let them," he said again, his voice softer this time. "I can't keep pretending the world is not made of lies and duty. You remind me there's still something real." She tried to steel her heart. "You are to marry the Irondale princess." His jaw tightened. "A union forged in politics, not love. I will sign the treaty. I will take her hand before the court. But my heart," his voice broke slightly, "my heart will never be hers." Rain began to fall, slow and cold. She stepped closer despite herself, the storm drenching her hair, her dress clinging to her skin. "You can't say these things," she whispered. "If the court learns of this, then let the court burn," he said hoarsely. And before she could answer, his hand found her cheek, warm against the chill, and his lips found hers. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, raw, the kind of kiss that felt like confession and surrender at once. The world around them vanished, the rain, the fear, the rules of kingdoms and crowns. There was only breath and heartbeat, lightning flickering above them like the gods bearing witness. When he finally drew back, they both stood trembling. "Forget me after tonight," he said quietly, his breath warm against her skin. "If you can." She stared at him, tears mixing with the rain. "You know I never will." He looked at her as if trying to memorize her face, every line, every shadow. Then, without another word, he turned and vanished into the storm. By dawn, the castle had changed again. Couriers arrived bearing new banners, those of Irondale. The wedding preparations had begun. Everywhere Seraphine turned, she saw silks being hung, tables set for diplomats, servants whispering of alliances and futures. But to her, every trumpet call sounded like mourning. In the infirmary she worked in silence, tending to wounded soldiers returned from the border. Her hands moved automatically, grinding herbs, tying bandages, anything to drown out the ache inside her. Mira watched her quietly. "You're paler than snow, girl. What happened?" "Nothing," Seraphine whispered. "Nothing at all." But her hands shook when she said it. That same morning, Alaric stood before the mirror, his crown gleaming on the table beside him. The reflection that stared back was a stranger. A man bound by duty, shackled by his own throne. Behind him, Rowan waited. "The princess arrives within the hour," Rowan said. "You should rest, Majesty. You've scarcely slept." "I don't need rest," Alaric muttered. "You need clarity," Rowan countered. "Whatever this distraction is, end it. You're not the man you were before she came." Alaric turned sharply. "And what man was that? A king who knew where his heart belonged, to his people, not to a servant?" Alaric's silence was long, then heavy. "Leave me." When Rowan was gone, Alaric picked up the crown, weighing it in his hands. The metal was cold, lifeless, yet it carried more chains than iron ever could. He set it down again and whispered into the emptiness, "Forgive me, Seraphine." That night, he walked the corridors in solitude, each step echoing like guilt. Outside, thunder rolled again. The scent of rain drifted through the open windows, mingling with the faint memory of lavender and smoke. And in that moment, King Alaric of Dravensia, ruler, warrior, savior, felt utterly, helplessly human. Chapter 4. The Betrayal at Dusk. Dusk fell blood-red over Dravensia. The castle walls, usually pale under sunlight, seemed to bleed with the fading sky. From the highest tower, the bells rang to announce the arrival of the Irondale delegation, and with them the end of whatever fragile peace Alaric and Seraphine had stolen in secret nights. The marriage treaty would be signed at sundown. The king would wed Princess Elara by week's end, and Seraphine would disappear, as all inconvenient truths must. The courtyard blazed with torches and banners. The air was thick with incense and the rustle of velvet gowns. Nobles gathered like crows, their smiles bright and false, their eyes hungry for scandal. Seraphine stood at the edge of the procession, among the servants, her plain grey dress a shadow in a sea of gold. She kept her head bowed as the Irondale carriage stopped before the grand steps. The door opened. Princess Elara descended, a vision of grace and precision. Her gown shimmered white and silver, her crown catching the dying light. She moved as if the world itself bent around her. "Your Majesty," she said, with a perfect curtsy when she reached Alaric, "it is an honor to at last meet the man who has ended 15 years of bloodshed." "The honor is mine," Alaric replied, his tone even, his expression unreadable. But Seraphine saw what the court could not, the way his fingers tightened around his sword hilt, the faint tension in his jaw, the mask of a man walking willingly toward his own undoing. When his gaze flickered briefly across the crowd, it found her, just once, for a heartbeat. The glance was enough to set her trembling. Then he looked away. That night, the castle celebrated. Music filled the air, lutes and flutes, laughter and lies. Wine flowed freely, as did the talk of alliances and dowries. But beneath the revelry, something darker stirred. Sir Rowan moved through the hall with quiet purpose, stopping to speak in low tones with Chancellor Verdun and the captain of the guard. Each nod was small, deliberate. From the shadows of the servants' entrance, Seraphine watched. her healer's intuition prickling like the moment before a storm. When she turned to leave, she heard her name. "Seraphine Valmont?" Rowan was saying to Verdun. "The girl is not what she pretends. We've traced her movements. She came from the borderlands last month, alone, and with connections to known Irondale spies." Seraphine's blood ran cold. "That cannot be true," Verdun said quietly. "She saved the king's life." Rowan's tone hardened. "Or she staged the attempt herself. Consider it. How convenient that she appeared the very night the assassin struck. A loyal servant or a planted pawn?" Seraphine's breath caught. Her heart hammered so loud she feared it would give her away. She backed into the shadows, the words echoing in her mind. "Staged the attempt, planted pawn." They were turning the story, turning her. An hour later, the celebration still raged below, but King Alaric stood alone on his balcony, watching the moon rise. He could hear the distant hum of laughter, the hollow joy of a court that belonged more to politics than people. He hadn't seen Seraphine since the ceremony. Every part of him ached to seek her out, to tell her that the promise he'd made under the rain hadn't been a lie, but he couldn't. Duty, that cruel and faithful companion, chained his every breath. When the door burst open, he turned sharply. Rowan entered, flanked by 2 guards. "Majesty," Rowan said, his expression grim. "We've found your assassin." Alaric frowned. "The one who fled the night of the banquet? You're certain?" "Yes, and we've found who aided him." Rowan stepped forward, placing a small satchel on the table. Inside lay a folded parchment sealed with Irondale's crest, the same crest that adorned Princess Alara's arrival banners. "This was discovered in the servants' quarters. It bears the name Seraphine Valmont." Alaric froze. "That's impossible. Read it." He broke the seal with trembling hands. Inside, the letter was brief. "Our messenger reports success. The king trusts the girl. When the night of union comes, he will be unguarded. Irondale's vengeance will be complete." Signed only with a symbol, the serpent of Irondale's spymaster. Alaric's breath came uneven. "No," he whispered, "this can't be hers. Someone planted it." Rowan's face was carved from stone. "Majesty, you know how this appears. She arrived unaccounted for. She was in the corridor during the first attempt. She's gained your confidence." "Enough," Alaric thundered. "You forget to whom you speak." Rowan bowed, but his tone did not waver. "Then grant her a trial, my king. If she is innocent, let her name be cleared. But if she's guilty," Alaric's voice broke, "if she's guilty, I'll know before the dawn." The guards came for her before midnight. Seraphine had just finished tending to a fevered child in the servants' infirmary when steel flashed in the torchlight. "By royal command," the captain said, "you are charged with conspiracy against the crown." Her breath left her. "What? No, there's been some mistake." 2 guards seized her arms. The herb jars shattered to the floor. The scent of lavender filled the air, sharp and sweet. Her scent as if mocking her. "I saved the king's life," she cried. "You know this." But the captain's face was cold. "And now you're accused of endangering it." They dragged her through the corridors, past servants who shrank away, past nobles who whispered. By the time they reached the courtyard, the rumor had already taken flight. The healer's daughter, the witch's child, the king's lover, the traitor, and above them, in the high tower, Alaric watched from the window, his face pale, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles bled. The cell was small, damp, and cruelly silent. Only the drip of water echoed in the darkness. Seraphine sat on the cold stone, her hands bound, her mind spinning in disbelief. How could everything collapse so quickly? Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A torch flared. When the door creaked open, she looked up. And there he was, Alaric. He dismissed the guard with a gesture, then entered, his cloak brushing the floor. The look in his eyes was not the one she knew. It was hard, conflicted, broken. "Tell me it isn't true," he said softly. "It isn't," she whispered. "You know it isn't." He stepped closer. "They found a letter in your chamber with Irondale's seal. Then they put it there. You think I would betray you? Tell me why you were in this castle," he demanded, his voice shaking. "Truly, no lies, Seraphine." Her eyes filled with tears. "I came to save a man. A soldier wounded at the border, my childhood friend. He was brought here under guard. I thought I could heal him before they sent him back to die." Alaric's expression flickered. Doubt, pain, love, war, all tangled together. "And the assassin?" he asked. "I saw him, that's all. I tried to stop him. Her voice broke. "You were the only one I wanted to protect." He wanted to believe her. God, he did believe her. But the weight of crown and counsel pressed on his shoulders like stone. "If I spare you," he whispered, "they will call me weak. They will call me blind. They will rise against me." She looked up at him through tears. "And if you kill me," he closed his eyes, "they will call me king." Silence hung heavy between them, a silence more painful than any scream. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Your trial is at dawn." "Alaric," she said, her voice trembling, "look at me." He did, and when their eyes met, he saw the truth written there, pure, defiant, unbroken. "I loved you," she said, "even knowing what it would cost." He turned away before she could see the tears that had already begun to fall. As he left the dungeon, the corridor swallowed him whole. Outside, the storm had returned, thunder rolling like distant drums of war. In the great hall, the nobles waited for his decree, and the princess sat poised at his throne's edge, her expression unreadable. "Majesty," Rowan said quietly, "the traitor has confessed." Alaric's voice was hollow. "She will stand trial at dawn. Then the kingdom will see justice." But when Alaric looked toward the window, toward the dungeon tower beyond the rain, he felt only the unbearable weight of regret. Justice, perhaps, but not truth and not love. Chapter 5. Chains of the Heart. The dungeon smelled of rust, rain, and sorrow. Morning had not yet touched the sky. The torches in the corridor burned low, their flames sputtering in the damp air. In the lowest cell, Seraphine sat chained to the wall, her wrists bruised, her eyes hollow from sleepless hours. She could hear the city stirring above, the faint creak of carts, the first cries of the market crows, life moving on, indifferent to the fact that hers was about to end. At sunrise, she would stand before the court. At noon, she would hang. That was the king's command. But it wasn't him she blamed, not truly, no. It was those who'd twisted him, poisoned his judgment with their soft, treacherous words. Men who feared her for what she knew, men who had waited for a moment of weakness and found it in the heart of a king who loved too deeply. The door to the dungeon creaked open. Seraphine looked up, expecting guards. but it was Rowan who entered first, the torchlight glinting off his armor. His face was hard, but his eyes carried something unfamiliar, guilt. He dismissed the guard at the gate. The door slammed shut behind them. "You should not be here," Seraphine said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, yet calm. "Does the king fear I'll curse him with my last breath?" Rowan hesitated. "You should be careful what words you speak, Healer. I've nothing left to lose." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I thought. And what did you think I was?" He looked away. "A liar, a spy, a witch. But I see now." His voice softened. "You're only a woman who trusted the wrong man." Her jaw clenched. "If you came to mock me—" "I came to warn you," he interrupted. "You were framed, Seraphine. The letter, it was planted by Verdun." The name struck her like a blade. "Verdun? The Chancellor?" Rowan nodded grimly. "He's been in correspondence with Irondale for months. He planned to use your execution to cement the alliance. The king's marriage to Princess Elara will give him control over both thrones. Dravencia will fall under Irondale's shadow, and Alaric will be nothing but a puppet." Seraphine's breath trembled. "Then why tell me this now?" "Because I can't undo it," he said bitterly. "But the king can, if he learns the truth before you die." She met his eyes. "Then take me to him." "I can't. He's surrounded by guards loyal to Verdun. He believes the council is protecting him from a traitor, and that traitor is you." "Then you must tell him." "I will try," Rowan said. "But if I fail?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's a hidden passage beneath this cell, an old drain leading to the river. If the king comes to you tonight, tell him to follow the sound of the water." And before she could speak again, he was gone, leaving only the echo of dripping stone. Far above the dungeon, in his private chamber, King Alaric sat before the dying fire. His crown lay discarded on the table, beside a goblet of untouched wine. He had not slept since the night of her arrest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, pale, defiant, heartbreakingly calm. He had condemned her with his silence. "You're a fool," he muttered to himself, "a king who cannot tell truth from treachery." The door opened behind him. Verdun entered, bowing slightly. "Majesty, the prisoner awaits judgment." Alaric's gaze did not lift. "And her confession? She has admitted to meeting with border smugglers." Verdun lied smoothly. "Her guilt is evident. The people already whisper that she bewitched you. You must show strength." Alaric's jaw tightened. "You seem eager for her death, Chancellor." Verdun smiled faintly. "I am eager for your reign to survive." When the door closed again, Alaric rose, his eyes dark as the storm gathering beyond the windows. Something inside him snapped. He could no longer tell if he was protecting his throne or destroying his soul. The corridor outside the dungeon was silent when he arrived. The guard stepped aside at his command, and Alaric entered the cell alone. His boots echoed against the stone. The torchlight painted his face in gold and shadow. Seraphine did not rise. She only looked at him, tired, beautiful, unbroken. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I had to see you." She smiled faintly. "To make peace before I hang?" He flinched. Don't speak like that." "I have no reason not to," she said. "You've already pronounced my death." He knelt before her then, taking her chained hands in his. "Seraphine, tell me the truth. One last time." Her voice broke. "I've told you nothing but the truth. I love you, Alaric. That is the only treason I have ever committed." The words shattered him. His eyes closed. his hands trembling. "Verdun says you confessed." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Then Verdun lies, and if you still believe him, then perhaps you never knew me at all." He lifted her face gently, his thumb tracing the bruise at her jaw. "I know your scent still lingers on my skin. I know your voice has followed me through every dream, and I know if I lose you, I will never forgive myself." "Then don't lose me," she whispered. Their lips met, soft, desperate, the kind of kiss born from the edge of ruin. For a moment they were no longer king and prisoner, but man and woman, two souls clinging to the memory of what they might have been. When he drew back, his voice was hoarse. "If I free you, they will call me traitor. If you let me die," she said, "you already are." Her words hung in the air, quiet, final, true. Then, faintly, they both heard it, the sound of water flowing beneath the stones. Rowan's signal. Alaric's eyes widened. "There's a passage?" She nodded. "He told me, beneath this cell. It leads to the river." He looked toward the door. "The guards will change shifts at midnight. That's when we go." She shook her head. "You'll lose everything." "I already have," he whispered. "But I will not lose you." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Stay silent. I'll return before the hour." And then he was gone, leaving her in the dim light, heart racing, torn between terror and hope. When he stepped into the corridor, a shadow detached from the wall. Verdun stood waiting. "Majesty," the Chancellor said softly. "Planning a rescue, are we?" Alaric froze. "You've been following me?" Verdun smiled. Thin, poisonous, always. "You think I'd let you ruin years of diplomacy for a servant girl?" He stepped closer. "You were never meant to love her. You were meant to use her. A king cannot afford a heart." Alaric's hand went to his sword. "You forged that letter." Verdun's eyes glittered. "And if I did? Who will believe you? At dawn she hangs, and by noon you wed the princess. The world will forget her name." The king's blade flashed from its sheath. "I won't." Verdun's smirk faltered. "You wouldn't dare." But Alaric's voice was death itself. "For her, I would dare anything." Chapter 6. The Night of Fire. The storm had not ceased since sunset. Lightning clawed across the sky, striking the castle's tallest spire and splitting it with a sound like the heavens breaking open. The air itself seemed alive, charged, trembling, as if Dravencia held its breath, waiting for something to end or begin. In the dungeon below, Seraphine counted the minutes by the beat of her heart. The guards outside were restless, one humming, one pacing, both waiting for the shift change. She could smell rain and smoke, faint but growing stronger. It wasn't just the storm, something else was burning. Then footsteps, steady, purposeful. She looked up. Alaric appeared in the doorway, cloak-soaked, eyes like flame. He carried no crown, no emblem of kingship, only a sword and the look of a man who had finally chosen his side. "Alaric," she breathed. "No time," he said, cutting the chain from her wrists with a single blow. "We have to go now." "Verdun?" "Dead," he said quietly. "He tried to stop me." She stared at him, stunned. I had no choice. He confessed everything." His voice cracked. "He was going to send you to the gallows at dawn and blame Irondale for your death. It would have meant war. So you killed him to save the peace?" He met her gaze. "No, I killed him to save you." They slipped into the narrow passage beneath the cell, a stone corridor slick with moss and old water. The air was damp and cold, but Seraphine barely felt it. The sound of rushing water guided them forward. Behind them, bells began to ring, not for ceremony this time, but alarm. "Someone's found the body," Alaric muttered. They ran. The tunnel wound downward into darkness, until at last it opened into an underground river roaring beneath the castle foundations. A small iron grate blocked their way. Alaric struck it once, twice, until it gave way. Seraphine looked back toward the tunnel entrance. "They'll be here soon. Then we don't stop," he said. "Not until we're free." They waded into the current, cold, furious water dragging at their legs. The torch went out, plunging them into darkness. Only his voice remained. "Hold on to me," she did. When the current swept them away, she clung to him as if her life depended on it, and it did. While they fought the river below, the castle above burned. Rowan had tried to cover their escape, but Verdun's guards, those still loyal to the dead chancellor, had discovered the truth. They set fire to the archives to destroy evidence of his treason, and soon the flames had spread through the eastern wing. By the time the first soldiers realized what had happened, half the royal keep was engulfed. From the courtyard, Princess Alara watched the blaze with cold fury. She had come to Dravencia to marry a king and inherit a throne, not watch it burn because of a servant girl. "Find them," she commanded the captain. "Alive or dead, I don't care. But bring me proof that the king is mine alone." When Alaric and Seraphine emerged from the tunnel mouth, the rain hit them like knives. They stumbled onto the riverbank, soaked, shivering, gasping for air. Behind them, the castle glowed against the night, a tower of fire piercing the storm. Seraphine fell to her knees. "It's all gone," she whispered. Alaric dropped beside her. "No," he said, "not gone, freed." But the sound of horses thundered through the rain, soldiers closing in. "Go," she urged. "You can still—" "I told you I would not lose you," he said. He drew his sword, turning toward the oncoming riders. "Get to the woods. Follow the river until you see the old bridge. Rowan will meet you there. What about you?" He smiled, that quiet, aching smile that had once undone her in the gardens. "Kings don't run, but lovers survive." "Alaric, please." He silenced her with a kiss, fierce, desperate, final. "Forget me after tonight," he whispered against her lips. "Forget the crown, the castle, the man I was, but never forget that I loved you." Then he turned and charged into the storm. The clash of steel rang out like thunder. Even outnumbered, Alaric fought with the strength of 10 men. Every blow he struck was for her. Every wound he took, a promise kept. Seraphine ran toward the trees, but she couldn't look away. The rain, the fire, the roar of the river, it all blurred into one terrible, beautiful chaos. At last, she saw him fall, not from weakness, but from the weight of too many blades. The soldiers surrounded his body. One raised a torch, as if to mark the end of a king, but the river, swollen from the storm, surged higher, dragging flames and men alike into its depths. And when the light faded, both king and fire were gone. When morning came, the sky was pale and broken. Dravencia's capital smoldered. The people whispered that their king had died, saving them from a traitor's rebellion. His name was mourned, his honor restored, his legend sealed in ash. No one searched for the healer's daughter, but far from the ruins, in a small village by the river's bend, a woman awoke with her hands bandaged, her body trembling and the faint scent of smoke still clinging to her skin. She remembered the last words he'd spoken, "Forget me after tonight." But she never could, not as long as the river sang his name. Chapter 7. The Scent of Tomorrow. Even when the fires died and the ashes of the castle were washed away, its waters whispered his name, carrying it through valleys, over stones, through the reeds that bent toward its current. It was said that on stormy nights, when lightning touched its surface, one could still hear the echo of a man's last promise, "Forget me after tonight." But Seraphine never could. A year passed. The village of Briar Hollow, hidden among the willows and wild thyme of Dravencia's northern border, was a quiet refuge for the lost. Fishermen mended their nets by dawn, children chased geese through muddy streets, and life, simple and unbothered, went on as if the world had never burned. In a small cottage on the edge of the forest lived a woman known to the villagers only as Mistress Sarah, a healer with calm hands and eyes that had seen too much. She spoke little of her past, only of the present, of herbs and roots, of poultices and sleep. When she walked through the market, people often turned to look, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of her scent, faint, familiar, lavender and smoke. It lingered long after she passed. The war had ended with Dravencia's fall. Princess Alara had returned to Irondale. The marriage alliance dissolved in scandal. The council had perished in the fire, and the nobles had scattered like birds. The throne remained empty. The line of King Alaric ended, so they said, bravely in battle, defending his people. But Seraphine knew better. Some nights she would wake in terror, certain she'd heard his voice beyond her window, low, ragged, calling her name. She would rise, open the shutters, and find only mist curling over the riverbank. Yet part of her believed he was still out there, scarred, hiding, perhaps even watching her from the shadows. It was madness, and still she left her lantern burning by the window every night, just in case. It was on the eve of midsummer when he came. The sun had already set. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and lilac. Seraphine was kneeling beside her herb garden when she heard the soft thud of boots on the path. She turned and froze. A man stood there, cloaked and hooded, his clothes travel-worn, his boots caked with mud. His right arm hung stiff at his side. The left bore the faint outline of a sword once carried for far too long. He said nothing, only looked at her, as though the sight of her hurt and healed him all at once. "Good evening," she said carefully. "You're injured?" "A wound long healed," he answered, voice low and rough, but the ache never left. The sound of it struck her like thunder. That voice, older, rougher, but his. She dropped the basket in her hands. Alaric. He pulled back his hood. Time had changed him. The golden hair was streaked with silver, the jawline harsher, the scar beneath his eye faint but deep. Yet the eyes, those same storm-gray eyes, still held her world within them. "Don't speak," he said softly, stepping closer. "I had to see if you were real." She reached out a trembling hand. "I thought you were dead." "So did I," he said with a faint smile. "The river took me far, and when I awoke, I was no longer a king, just a man who had lost everything but the memory of your scent." Her tears fell freely now. "You should have come sooner." "I couldn't," he whispered. "There were still men loyal to Verdun hunting the survivors. I lived as a soldier, a wanderer, a ghost. But when I heard of a healer by the river, I knew." He stepped close enough to touch her then. his hand, rough and trembling, brushing her cheek as if afraid she would vanish. "I told you to forget me after that night," he said, "and yet I've thought of nothing but you since." Her breath caught. "You're no longer king." "No," he said, "but I'm still yours, if you'll have me." They sat before the fire that night, neither daring to sleep. He told her of the years he'd spent wandering, of battles fought under false names, of nights spent staring at empty skies, haunted by the smell of lavender on his hands. She told him of how she'd hidden, healed, waited. The silence between them was full, the kind that doesn't demand words, because hearts remember what lips once promised. At one point she reached for his wounded arm. "This scar, Verdun's guard," he said quietly, "a parting gift." She touched it gently, the way she once had when she'd tended his wounds as a king. "It never truly healed. Neither did I," he murmured. She smiled sadly. "Then let me try again." As she wrapped his arm with fresh linen and herbs, her fingers brushed his skin, and the air between them seemed to hum, not with pain, but with life. When she finished, he caught her wrist, pressing her hand to his heart. "You gave me my life once," he said. "Now you've given it back again." Dawn came quietly, golden light spilling across the cottage floor, carrying the scent of the wildflowers she'd hung by the window. Seraphine stirred beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. He lay awake, watching her breathe, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, like it was the rhythm of peace itself. Outside, the river murmured softly. The world felt new. He turned slightly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Seraphine," she opened her eyes, smiling through the haze of morning. "Hmm?" He hesitated, then said almost shyly, "You smell of lavender and smoke." She laughed softly. "You remember? I could never forget." He kissed her, not the desperate kind born of loss or fear, but one of quiet certainty, of lives rebuilt after ruin. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" "Now," she whispered, "we live, not as king and healer, but as man and woman, as what we always were meant to be." Years later, travelers passing through Briar Hollow would sometimes speak of a man and woman who lived by the river. He carried the calm of a soldier who had seen too much. She, the grace of one who had healed the world around her. In spring, when the lavender bloomed and smoke curled from their cottage chimney, the breeze carried their story through the fields. A tale of a king who died for love, and a woman who taught him how to live again. And those who walked by the river swore that, if they closed their eyes, they could still hear his voice in the water. "Forget me after tonight," the king said. Yet he could never forget her scent,